Senator, you'll never get me to say that we can't do things better, and you'll never say that we can't do things differently to do them better. But I will speak up to defend the program. We're actually going to vote on a process to start to accept new contracts, and we're in advance of CAL FIRE, which is really the fire suppression agency. They still haven't provided maps that will tell these plants where they're going to get their fuel from. So we'll be actually setting up the structure to let new contracts, but there still won't be maps to tell them where they're going to get the fuel from.
But look. The point is, it's now you're voting this week on taking solicitations. Solicitations won't take place to July. My point is, the governor declares an emergency. Trees are dying around the state. You've got the state legislature and the governor saying RPS, RPS, RPS.
Senator, we don't even know how much fuel there needs to be taken care of, or how much these plants are capable of handling. What we do know is that some 80% of them are likely to be on federal lands, and currently there's no plan to actually get the fuel off those lands and to these plants. So we're doing this real time with other agencies and trying to make it work. And so I think we're doing a decent job on this one. I think there are other places where you could raise these issues, and I wouldn't have this kind of a defense. But we're in advance of the other state agencies.
I know, but that, can I say something just real quickly to finalize in terms of this issue? I just don't buy it. The governor declares an emergency in October. I can't accept that as an appropriate response. Well, we're now in March and we're going to get solicitations and saying, well, it's the other guy's fault, right? Well, I'm not
blaming anybody. I'm just saying that we're all working hard to try to get it done quickly.
But quickly in 6 months, which is a 10-month process where a governor declares emergency, that to me is not quickly. And I'll bet you anything, I don't want to push you on this, but I'll bet you anything, if we examined your file and examined what the communications were to CAL FIRE and everybody else, and how hard did you push, and what are you doing to make that work, my bigger point is this, whether this is the perfect example or not, I don't want to touch a nerve. I give you the highest marks in working in a very difficult situation. I'm just wondering, in the bigger picture, you look at safety, all these examples of what we've seen in a society where years ago they told me $75 billion of economic activity through what I call the Railroad Commission. It's probably more of $100 billion today in the economy. Is this something that we need to fundamentally rethink, because the structure of how you work and your cases and your decisions and your process is so bogged down that, and society's moving so quick and emergencies happen, that we define time in such a different way than what the new economy is defining time in?
Well, some of that's above my pay grade. You guys have defined a very rigorous and deliberative process for us to actually issue rates to the utilities. We've implemented it in ways that meet the test of the laws you've adopted. So if, in fact, that's your belief that we should be setting rates in a different way, if we should be issuing contracts that are going to have impacts on those rates in a different way, then I think it's worth having that discussion. I started by saying that we have one foot in the past and one foot in the future. But in terms of these old, inefficient biomass plants, I think we're actually moving along pretty good.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much time. I just have two questions if you can respond to in writing. One was dealing with storage facilities. If it turns out in the San Fernando Valley, where I represent, these guys, if we can't, in fact, I've heard the stories. I think Senator Pavley talked about how big of a facility it is in one of the earlier hearings. If, in fact, that's going to be shut down, what plans do you have for alternatives? Again, I don't want to take up too much time. And lastly, the whole regional issue on the IOUs and what we're doing in the discussion there, kind of to get an update on those two things. Again, you can, whatever the chairman deems appropriate, but I think those are two kind of very important points.
So on the first, the gas storage facilities, I'll just kind of deal with the one that is the most in focus, which is Aliso Canyon. There's a very special process that's underway for vetting that project that involves two state agencies for purposes of ensuring well integrity and gas pipeline integrity. So the lead on the well portions of that is the agency that actually has the specific statutory authority, the Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, and we're cooperating closely with them. They're going to have to certify that the wells actually could withstand the rigors of reinjection before anything can conceivably happen there. We've also called for people to provide information on all the other gas storage facilities across the state. But you do point to an issue that we are also working on with another set of state agencies, including and a local agency, the question of how we will function without having access to that
Right, that's the
facility.
question.
So real quickly, to give you a sense of the general constraints, the size of the pipes, the capacity of the pipes at full operation is roughly 3.5 billion cubic feet of gas per day coming into the basin. During the winter, use of natural gas in the LA basin is about 5.7 billion cubic feet. So it's unlikely that we will be able to operate completely solely based on pipeline deliveries to the basin. The purpose of the gas field in part was to then provide that excess. Now, I think there are things that we can do. These are peak capacities. And they're not necessarily universal. There's a certain number of days per year. There's 15 billion cubic feet of buffer gas that will certainly get us through this summer. And then I think the other things that we can do are particularly in summer, reduce the use of electricity, which is the peak use for gas in the summer is to power those peak generators for the late hot afternoons. Flex your power, starting to, we actually have taken steps to put money into low-income housing, into low-income ratepayers to actually increase their ability to reduce their electric demand during the summer and the winter. And I think in winter, what we really face is how do you get people to do something we've never done before, which is to actually use the same kind of techniques that we do for flex your power for electricity for natural gas, because in the winter, the predominant use of natural gas from that facility is, and that's where the peak I pointed out is for heating, cooking, and cooling, mostly of residential, multifamily, and small commercial infrastructure. So that's the challenge, and I think that we can overcome it. I just think that it calls on us to do things we haven't done before. It's a multi-agency effort that involves us, the Energy Commission, DOGGR, and LADWP. So I don't want to minimize the challenges. I will say that we've had success in the past when San Onofre dropped out of the grid. People predicted widespread brownouts and blackouts in the Southern California region. We did a lot of these same kinds of things. We had this same kind of interagency coordination. We had this same kind of planning. We had this same kind of urgent efforts to free up money for efforts. So I think we can get there. I will say that there's always those outliers that are troublesome. A failure of a compressor, the failure of a gas line that means it had to be taken out for service. All these kinds of things that are absolutely unexpected that can throw us for a loop. So we're belt, suspenders, and everything else we can get.
Good morning, President Picker et al. I want to go back to the poles and the concern that they're wooden, they're old, they're not necessarily safe for the public. I also worry about the linemen and women who are on those poles. So my question is, do we know how many there are in the state? Do we know which ones are in disrepair? And is there a plan to fix them or replace them?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
So there are roughly 17 million poles. And some of them are held by.
Million.
This is probably the most important piece of infrastructure in the state. It's not only important for electricity, it's important for a variety of different communications functions. The federal government deemed poles to be a right-of-way, a common right-of-way, and required pole owners to allow other utilities to have access to them. So not only do we have antiquated infrastructure, I'll give the example that I got early in my career where I was meeting with a head of the LADWP, and he pulled me over to the window and he pointed to a pole just on the other side from his parking lot, and he said, that pole's been there since Thomas Edison walked the earth. And he said that Thomas Edison could walk by and tell you the manufacturer and the model of that transformer. And so it's easy to defer expenditures on something that's not mechanically complicated, that doesn't appear to add a lot of value, that seems to be fairly stable. So utilities do sampling programs, and they're constantly surveying them, and they actually have some risk assessments and can tell us which poles they think are most in need. But we're starting to see here as in everywhere else that things are reaching the end of their useful life, and they're starting to really gear up. And so I will say that the big portion, for example, of Southern California's general rate request this last time around was for pole replacement.
Okay.
And so, yeah, steel poles too, true. And so the issues that you face are now that these poles are also getting a lot more weight on them than they ever had before. Because you have a pole that's carrying electric at the top, may soon have at the very top CMRS, which is the newest form of broadband, which means that there's an issue for the installers who are not going to be from the electric utility putting the equipment on the very top. There may be cable, there may be wireline, there may be fiber. So
Light fixture?
a light fixture. So the poles are providing a lot of services. They may be dumb, they may not be very modern, but they're absolutely critical to our day-to-day function and the health of our economy. I really think about them a lot. That's why we're having this pole safety en banc, is so the commissioners can actually go out and see the results of a pole failure with the Malibu fire of 2008, talk to the residents, talk to the emergency responders, talk to the utility workers, talk to the utility execs, and really begin to wrap our heads around this so that all of us live with the same kind of paranoia that I have whenever I see a pole. So I think that we will succeed here, but it's only by ceaselessly looking and asking questions and learning more.
So when all these different amenities, so to speak, are added onto the poles, do the cable companies, do the folks adding on their little amenities, do they pay to have those added onto the poles?
Generally, that's what we're starting to see, these pole administrators. And so they don't own the poles, but they manage the poles, and they try to deal with this. There's always conflicts as to who should pay for what share of a pole and how much. There are also conflicts as to who gets access when and how. And there's also lots of conflicts as to who's cleaning up their equipment or their disused equipment on. As people cut off utility service, you have wires going from the pole to the house. Who goes and makes sure that it doesn't break and whip around in the wind and arc over the two active electrical wires and create a hazard? So there are lots of issues. What seems dumb, stupid, not mobile, not complicated is actually one of the bigger safety challenges that I think we face.
Yeah, I'd like to say the federal government, the FCC in particular, regulates access to the poles by cable companies and sets a scheme for determining what the price they pay would be. We have broad rules and regulations setting safety standards for the poles and pole loading. So it's once again, it's a complicated multi-jurisdictional type of thing, but we are the principal responsible entity in California for poles and pole safety.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and President Picker. Good to see you and welcome. My goodness, dang. So I just have three quick items on three different subjects, and one is on the issue of your comment about one foot in the past and another in the future. and the issue of ride sharing. It's a subject that our chair knows nothing about. Little joke there for the chair. There you go. But in all sincerity, in regards to looking at that issue, and is PUC a right fit to be able to regulate this industry that's competitive? And number one, I know that you have statutes that you need to be able to uphold and understand that, and you take a look at the competitive nature of the industry. Is there another potential? I'm not looking for where you think it may be a best fit if it's not in the PUC, but is this something that the legislature should be exploring?
So I'll just speak from my own personal perspective and not speak
Please.
for the commission as a whole. You know, this seems to have been decided before I got there. And the challenge was this was a new statewide industry that was growing real quickly. And I think the commission really felt like something needed to happen to set basic standards for safety and for operations. We're not the agency that we were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when we regulated commercial trucking, a variety of different limousine and stage services, commercial intercity buses, a lot of other transportation functions. We had 150 people who went out every day with a CHP officer to look at commercial trucking and to look at some of these other things. We're sort of now, we have that memory and that history, and there's an expectation by large segments of the public that we do that. But I don't know that we really have the capacity. That's my assessment. When I got there, we had just completed the first set of rules for TNCs, but I didn't see a plan for staffing enforcement, and that troubled me. So I did start talking to other state agencies and saying, well, is this something that we should be doing? And the answer that I got from all the other agencies I talked to is, well, it's not us, so it's you. And so I will say that somebody has to set standards.
I totally agree.
And unless there's somebody else who steps forward or is tasked with it, I think we should continue. I just, I'm still troubled by the fact that this is a program that we used to do successfully. The nature of the core industry that we were servicing has changed. Our ability, our resources, our core function has changed. I just asked my question to myself and to others. Maybe somebody else should do it, but I don't know who. So somebody's got to do it.
Well, it was being done at the local level, and the standards were set at the local level, and they just sought a departure from that, and currently they're operating without very many standards at all. So you have really competition on an unlevel playing ground, and that just seems to me that when you eliminate the driver protections and the consumer protections, those are the people that are going to be principally hurt, the consumers and the drivers. And is there an option of working more with the locals in maybe enforcement, oversight, and maybe, is that an option?
We currently just have 22 transportation inspectors for enforcement throughout the whole state.
And how many operators?
60,000 is the number I've heard.
Uber came here and said they had 120,000, and Lyft wouldn't say, but it was estimated to be about 40,000. And those are just two companies.
Right.
So we're looking at flooding the California market overnight with 100 and maybe 80 potentially, 180,000 different operators with no consumer or employee protections. To me, that seems like a recipe for disaster, and it's on all our collective,
Well,
No, and I think that, and just chiming on that, I think it's an issue of bandwidth, right? Of being able, and I don't want to speak for you, right? But as we've seen the industry evolve, and state government has not evolved with it. And I'm not here to point fingers at one agency or the other, but I do think that it is like this when other agencies are talking to each other about long-term who should regulate. And looking at a long-term fix, because I think you're absolutely right, is that we've allowed that to be able to evolve without the oversight, and looking at a long-term fix would probably be in the best interest of all, particularly consumers, long-term. So I appreciate that. And I had two other items here really quickly, Mr. Chair. And then one is in regards to broadband in rural areas. And I know I have a soapbox, and I will not step up on that representing a rural area. But I think it comes down to just basic necessities these days, particularly in rural California. Not only is it not having access to high-speed internet, which is essential to success of businesses in this country, but then it just comes down to the reliability of our state's 911 system. We have had 5 significant outages that have put residents in unsafe positions over the last 3 years, and ensuring reliability of that 911 system. Now, by the way, none of the outages were caused by any of the telecom corporations. One was even caused by a Caltrans backhoe going through a line that knocked out 120,000 connections. At the same time, though, there is no communication when we have a 911 outage in rural areas as there is in urban areas, and that put lives at risk. We had the Coast Guard flying for 24 hours straight because of their mission to protect the coast, and there's no communication on the coast, and it cost taxpayers $250,000. Just wondering if there's been any discussion on that. I know we have a potential solution that we're advancing that may involve Office of Emergency Services versus PUC, but just any thoughts on broadband and 911 reliability?
Well, let me speak again from my own personal perspective rather than speaking for the commission. I'm constantly perplexed by the range of different technologies that provide services for telephony, whether it's fiber in some cases, copper cable, mobile, broadband, wireless, and people are all using different technologies, but it's not even throughout the state. And so, for example, there are some 10 different utilities, telephone utilities, that we still set rates for and still regulate full boat. Most, however, we don't. And in some areas, the legislature has told us that we don't have authority. Yeah. So if those wireless broadband services are provided over VoIP, we're constantly wrestling with how far we can go. And so I think that given this very, very irregular framework, it'll be very hard to cobble together solutions. An example would be that the legislature has asked us to provide funds to be able to get to 98% of the population for broadband services, but it does not include funding for redundancy, which is, I think, part of what you're talking about. And so it doesn't allow us to actually have accountability for some of the technologies that are starting to dominate the marketplace. And so, do we have competition? It would appear so. Is it comprehensive and universal throughout the state? I don't think we have the answer to that. Do we have the tools to make that happen? I really suspect not.
And I think we actually know it's not, competition is not universal across the state. And frankly, it's because of penetration of households, right? It is challenging in more rural areas to be able to look at what your profit margin is going to be. So I do think that there are some challenges throughout the state. And I'll tell you, and I think we need to give credit where credit is due. I know that AT&T is looking at investing in the North Coast long-term on federal funds, because I think that is one of the areas where...
That's the Connect America program, which we did encourage them to accept monies and to actually do that.
Yeah, and by the way, there's no formal plans cooked, but I know that at least at the state, they're looking at connecting, because that's the biggest hole that we have in California right now is on the North Coast. But I think the challenge has been that it's taken us so long to be able to get to even this discussion. And when you need high-speed internet literally to have a successful business these days, it is very challenging for rural California to be able to keep up, even when everyone keeps saying that California's on fire in regard to our economy. So there's some real disconnects there.
Senator McGuire, I just wanted to add, we have a program called the California Advanced Services Fund, which focuses on
100
bringing broadband. It's funded about $100 million a year. It's obviously a slow process. We have experts who have GIS maps, which track where broadband is available, and they're moving systematically to try and address principally rural needs, where nowadays you can't operate a business unless you have broadband. So we are on this, and obviously it's something we're glad to work with the committee on.
And we've been in contact with your staff. I think what's challenging in regards to that 100 million is if there is a
Oversubscribed.
public service, right? And they say there is a customer base and it would be competitive. So there's, anyway, I don't want to go down that hole, but I think that's an ongoing issue.
I think you point out this challenge, and I think that is what Senator Hertzberg was talking about, is there's an expectation, not just that whole regions be served as a market, but every customer expects it nowadays. And how do we actually do that? And so I don't think we have perfect tools.
And the final item, Mr. Chair, is in regards to your action, what you're looking at on Friday. Regarding furthering the governor's emergency
Thursday.
order. Excuse me, on Thursday. I apologize.
It's in print in case you'd like to look at the.
I have it right here.
Okay.
There we go.
They'll actually read it.
There we go. I think that the PUC wants to, I think the goal, and correct me if I'm wrong, wants to ensure that biomass facilities, it's connected to the emergency order, and you're able to utilize that timber that may be potentially cut to be able to go into these biomass facilities. And many of them currently are offline. And I think that right now there's about 400 to 450 megawatts that have been offline.
No, it's probably closer to about 120 megawatts that have gone offline. There's about 440 megawatts of biomass all throughout the state. And so, I mean, to state the challenge we have is that these are old, inefficient, and very expensive plants. They were originally designed to deal with the waste from sawmills and wood production.
Correct.
They were designed to bring down the cost of landfilling that waste. They were licensed under PURPA in the late 70s and early 80s. Some of them supplied heat and for other purposes. But they're really inefficient, they're old, they're not going to last much longer anyway, and they're expensive. And so they are very important to help reduce fire fuels, but a lot of them are not close to those fire fuels. They're so far that the cost of transportation would make them further out of market, and particularly in the North Coast.
Well, I actually know there are two on the North Coast that are quite excited about the governor's action. As you have heard in earful.
They're all there with expensive contracts and waving that executive order.
And so, but I think the point is this, is that there are some challenges in regards to the percentages and where the United States Forest Services come in. Mr. Picker is really excited that we're having this conversation. I don't know if you could tell. And I think the other piece is in regards to the price and how that is able to be advanced. And I think that's another discussion, correct? And on the issue of the governor wanted to be able to utilize these plants, and I understand that there are some challenges, but to be able to utilize these plants in regards to a potential answer to the mortality rates that we're seeing.
Partial answer, I think, because we're discovering that the problem is much bigger than even 440 megawatts is going to solve.
Absolutely. But what we do know is there is a potential market there, and there are willing buyers of that material.